The fluorescent lights in Dr. Martinez's office buzzed overhead as I sat in the sterile chair, my hands trembling slightly as I processed her words. Multiple sclerosis. The diagnosis hung in the air like a dark cloud, and I could feel my world shifting beneath my feet. "The good news is we caught it early," Dr. Martinez said gently, her kind eyes meeting mine across the mahogany desk. "With proper treatment and lifestyle adjustments, many people with MS live full, productive lives." I nodded mechanically, trying to absorb the medical jargon. She was explaining disease-modifying therapies, symptom management, the importance of physical therapy. But all I could think about was how I was going to tell Marcus, my husband of 12 years. The drive home through downtown Phoenix felt surreal. The desert landscape that I'd grown to love over the past decade seemed different now, as if I was seeing it through a new lens. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the suburban streets of our Scottsdale neighborhood, and I pulled into our driveway with a heavy heart. Marcus was in his home office when I walked through the front door, the familiar sound of his keyboard clicking away echoing through our split-level house. He was always working. His successful consulting firm demanded long hours, but the financial security it provided had allowed me to pursue my passion as a freelance graphic designer. "How did the appointment go?" he called out without looking up from his dual monitors. I stood in his doorway, watching him type furiously, his sandy brown hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it, a habit he developed during stressful projects. The man I'd fallen in love with at Arizona State University, the one who used to surprise me with weekend trips to Sedona just to see me smile. "Marcus, can you please look at me?" He sighed and swiveled in his chair, his blue eyes meeting mine with mild irritation. "What's wrong? You look pale." "I have multiple sclerosis." The words came out flat, matter of fact. I watched his expression change from annoyance to confusion to something I couldn't quite identify. "What does that mean exactly?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. I explained what Dr. Martinez had told me, the unpredictable nature of the disease, the potential for mobility issues, the fatigue that could come and go without warning. As I spoke, I watched Marcus's face, searching for the compassion and support I desperately needed. "So you might not be able to work as much?" he asked, his business mind immediately jumping to practical concerns. "It's possible. Some days might be harder than others." But Dr. Martinez said with treatment. "This is just great," he interrupted, standing up and beginning to pace around his office. "Do you know how much pressure I'm under at work right now? The Henderson project alone is consuming 60 hours a week, and now I have to worry about—" He trailed off, but I heard the unspoken words. Now he had to worry about me becoming a burden. "Marcus, I'm still the same person. This doesn't change who I am." He stopped pacing and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not anger, not sadness, but something colder. "Calculation. Doesn't it, though? I mean, let's be realistic here. What happens when you can't contribute anymore? When you can't work, can't take care of the house, can't—" He gestured vaguely. "What happens when you're useless?" The word hit me like a physical blow. Useless. After 12 years of marriage, countless late nights supporting his business dreams, moving across the country when his career demanded it, this was how he saw me. "I can't believe you just said that," I whispered. "I'm just being practical. We have a mortgage, car payments, your student loans. If you can't pull your weight—" I turned and walked away before he could finish the sentence. In our bedroom, I sat on the edge of our king-size bed, the one we'd picked out together when we bought this house 5 years ago, and stared at my reflection in the dresser mirror. The woman looking back at me was still recognizable. Shoulder-length auburn hair, green eyes that Marcus used to say reminded him of emeralds, a face that showed the beginnings of laugh lines earned through years of happiness I thought we'd shared. But something in those eyes had changed today. Not just because of the diagnosis, but because of Marcus's reaction to it. That night at dinner, we ate in silence. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife as we sat at our dining room table, the one I'd refinished myself 2 summers ago. Marcus scrolled through his phone between bites of a salmon I'd prepared, acting as if our earlier conversation had never happened. "Dr. Martinez wants to start me on a treatment plan," I said, breaking the silence. "There might be some side effects initially, but it could slow the progression significantly." "How much is it going to cost?" was his immediate response. "I don't know yet. I'll find out when I meet with the insurance coordinator next week." He nodded curtly and went back to his phone. The man who used to ask about every detail of my day, who used to listen to my dreams and fears with genuine interest, couldn't even be bothered to ask how I was feeling. Later that night, as I lay in bed listening to Marcus's steady breathing beside me, I stared at the ceiling and felt more alone than I ever had in my life. The diagnosis was scary enough, but the realization that my husband saw me as nothing more than an economic unit was devastating. I thought about our wedding day, dancing to At Last by Etta James in the ballroom of the Arizona Biltmore. I thought about the promises we'd made in sickness and in health, for better or for worse. Apparently, those were just words to him. As the digital clock on my nightstand clicked past midnight, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to let Marcus's cruel words define me. I wasn't going to accept being seen as useless, and I certainly wasn't going to stay in a marriage where my worth was measured solely by my productivity. But first, I had to survive the surgery Dr. Martinez had scheduled for the following month, a procedure to implant a device that would help manage my symptoms. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I began to formulate a plan that would ensure Marcus understood exactly what he was losing. The weeks following my diagnosis passed in a haze of medical appointments, insurance calls, and increasingly tense interactions with Marcus. Every conversation seemed to revolve around money, logistics, and the inconvenience my condition would cause to his carefully ordered life. I threw myself into my freelance work with renewed vigor, determined to prove that I wasn't the burden he seemed to think I was becoming. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was working harder than ever to show my worth to a man who had already decided I had none. My surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in early November. The procedure itself wasn't particularly risky, but Dr. Martinez had explained that the recovery would require several weeks of rest and physical therapy. The device they were implanting would help manage some of my symptoms, but the adjustment period could be challenging. "You'll need someone to drive you home and stay with you for at least the first 48 hours, Dr. Martinez had explained during my pre-op appointment. "No lifting, minimal walking, and you'll likely be quite tired from the anesthesia." When I told Marcus about the requirements, his response was predictably selfish. "Tuesday. That's right in the middle of the Henderson presentation prep. Can't you reschedule for Friday?" "Marcus, this is surgery, not a dental cleaning. They've already coordinated with my insurance, the surgical team, and the device manufacturer. I can't just move it around like a business meeting." He sighed heavily, as if my medical needs were a personal affront to his schedule. "Fine. I'll figure something out." The Sunday night before my surgery, I found myself sitting in our living room, staring out the large picture window that faced our small backyard. The desert landscaping we'd installed together looked stark under the pale moonlight, the cacti and desert willows creating strange shadows across the decomposed granite. Marcus was, as usual, in his office working on his laptop. I could hear him on a conference call with colleagues, his voice animated and engaged in a way it hadn't been with me in weeks. That's when I overheard it. "Yeah, my wife's having some minor surgery Tuesday, so I might be a little distracted," he was saying to someone on the call. "Nothing serious, just an inconvenience, really. Hopefully, she'll be back to normal soon, and I won't have to deal with all this medical drama." Minor surgery. Nothing serious. Medical drama. I felt something inside me crack. Not break, crack. Like a windshield that's been hit by a stone, spiderwebbing outward until the whole thing becomes too damaged to see through clearly. I walked quietly to our bedroom and sat down at the small writing desk I'd set up in the corner, the one Marcus had complained about because it didn't match our bedroom furniture. Opening my laptop, I began to type. The letter poured out of me like water from a broken dam. 12 years of love, support, sacrifice, and partnership reduced to a few pages of Times New Roman font. I wrote about the woman I'd been when we met, the dreams I'd put on hold to support his career, the compromises I'd made without complaint. I wrote about the person I'd become during our marriage, stronger, more independent, more capable than I'd ever given myself credit for. And I wrote about what I'd realized in the weeks since my diagnosis. Marcus, by the time you read this, I'll be in surgery. Not minor surgery as you told your colleagues, but a procedure that could significantly improve my quality of life with a disease that will be part of me for the rest of my life. When Dr. Martinez told me I had MS, my first thought wasn't about my health, my future, or even my fears. It was about how to tell you, I was worried about your reaction, about disappointing you, about becoming a burden to the man I've loved for 12 years. I should have been worried about myself. Your response to my diagnosis has shown me something I've been blind to for longer than I care to admit. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being your partner and became your employee. My value to you has been measured in my ability to contribute financially, to maintain our home, to support your dreams while setting aside my own. When you called me useless, you weren't talking about my diagnosis. You were talking about how you see me as a person. I've spent the last 3 weeks trying to prove you wrong, working extra hours despite my fatigue, maintaining our household despite my symptoms, pretending that your coldness didn't cut me to the bone. But I finally understand that I don't need to prove anything to you. I need to prove something to myself. I've been your wife for 12 years, but I've forgotten how to be me. I gave up my dreams of opening my own design studio to support your business. I moved away from my family when your career demanded it. I put my wants, my needs, my identity on the back burner so consistently that I forgot they existed. This disease has given me an unexpected gift: clarity. I won't spend whatever time I have left apologizing for existing. I won't measure my worth by your standards anymore. And I won't stay married to someone who sees me as useless. I've contacted Patricia Reeves, the divorce attorney Rebecca recommended when she went through her divorce last year. I've also opened my own bank account and transferred half of our savings money I contributed to our marriage and have every right to claim. I'm not leaving to hurt you, Marcus. I'm leaving to save myself. I hope someday you'll understand that love isn't transactional. Marriage isn't a business partnership where you can discard the other person when they're no longer profitable. And worth isn't measured by productivity. I hope you find someone who can meet your standards. But more than that, I hope you find enough compassion to realize that the woman you called useless has been holding your life together for over a decade. Don't try to contact me while I'm recovering. I need this time to heal physically and emotionally. Take care of yourself, Alexandra. I printed the letter and placed it in an envelope with his name written on the front in my careful script. Then I packed a suitcase with clothes, toiletries, and the few personal items that meant the most to me: photos of my family, my grandmother's jewelry box, the first freelance design award I'd won. I called my sister Rebecca in Portland. "Alex, do you know what time it is?" "Becca, I'm leaving Marcus." There was a pause, then her voice came back warm and alert. "What happened?" I told her everything: the diagnosis, Marcus's reaction, the weeks of feeling like a burden in my own home. By the time I finished, I was crying for the first time since that day in Dr. Martinez's office. "Come here," she said without hesitation. "After your surgery, as soon as you're cleared to travel, come to Portland. You can stay with us as long as you need. I can't impose on you and Jake. You're not imposing. You're my sister, and I love you. Besides, Portland has an amazing design scene. It might be exactly what you need for a fresh start." After I hung up, I placed the letter on Marcus's pillow and wheeled my suitcase out to the car. I drove to a hotel near the hospital, checked in under my maiden name Alexandra Collins, and tried to get some sleep before the surgery that would mark not just the beginning of managing my MS, but the beginning of reclaiming my life. The next morning, as I sat in the pre-op area in my hospital gown, I felt scared but also oddly liberated. I was facing surgery alone, just as I'd been facing everything else alone for weeks. But this time, it was by choice. When the anesthesiologist asked if I had any final questions before we began, I simply said, "I'm ready." For the first time in years, I truly was. I woke up in the recovery room to the sound of monitors beeping steadily and the soft murmur of medical staff going about their routines. The surgery had been successful, Dr. Martinez explained through the haze of anesthesia, and the implanted device was already showing positive readings. "How are you feeling?" asked Janet, the recovery nurse who'd been checking on me every few minutes. "Different," I said honestly. And I didn't just mean physically. The next 48 hours passed quietly in my hotel room. I'd arranged for a medical transport service to drive me from the hospital, and the hotel staff was incredibly accommodating, bringing me meals and checking in regularly. Rebecca called every few hours, and even my parentes, who I'd finally told about both the diagnosis and the separation, called to offer their support. What I didn't receive was a single call or text from Marcus. On Thursday afternoon, 3 days after my surgery, Rebecca called with an update that made my stomach drop. Alex, Jake saw Marcus at that sports bar downtown last night. He wasn't alone. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Who was he with? That woman from his office, Vanessa something. The blonde one you mentioned meeting at the company Christmas party. Vanessa Clark. 28 years old, single, everything I apparently was not. I should have been devastated, but instead, I felt a strange sense of validation. Marcus's reaction to my diagnosis made perfect sense now. How long do you think? I started to ask, then stopped. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I'd already made my decision before I discovered his infidelity. I'm sorry, Alex. I know this makes everything harder. Actually, it makes everything clearer. By Friday, I was feeling well enough to return to the house to collect more of my belongings. I timed my visit for mid-afternoon, knowing Marcus would be at the office. But when I pulled into our driveway, his BMW was parked in its usual spot. I found him in the kitchen, sitting at our breakfast bar with his laptop open and papers scattered everywhere. He looked up when I walked in, and I saw something in his expression I hadn't expected: guilt. Alex, how are you feeling? Fine, thanks for asking. I kept my voice neutral. I'm just here to get some things. He stood up and ran his hand through his hair, that familiar gesture that used to endear him to me. We need to talk. Do we? You can't just leave a letter and disappear. We're married. We have responsibilities, commitments. I had commitments too, Marcus. In sickness and in health, remember? He had the grace to look ashamed. I was stressed. The Henderson project, the pressure at work, I didn't handle your diagnosis well. You called me useless. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I leaned against the kitchen counter and really looked at my husband's soon-to-be ex-husband. Even in his guilt and discomfort, there was something calculating in his eyes, as if he was trying to figure out the best angle to convince me to stay. How did you mean it then? He struggled for a moment, clearly trying to find the right words. I was worried about the financial impact. The medical bills, the potential loss of income. The medical bills that our insurance covers. The income from my freelance work that's actually increased since the diagnosis. It's not just about money, isn't it? I interrupted. Because that's all you've talked about since Dr. Martinez gave me the diagnosis. Not how I'm feeling, not what support I might need, not how scared I am about living with a chronic illness. Just money and inconvenience. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. I know I handle this badly, but running away isn't the answer. We can work through this. Can we work through Vanessa Clark too? His face went pale. How did you? It doesn't matter how I know. What matters is that while I was in surgery, recovering from a procedure related to a disease I'll have for the rest of my life, you were moving on. How long, Marcus? How long have you been seeing her? He couldn't meet my eyes. It's not what you think. When I needed you most, you abandoned me emotionally. When I tried to show you I wasn't the burden you thought I was, you were already replacing me. That tells me everything I need to know about what our marriage meant to you. I walked past him toward the stairs, intending to pack more of my belongings, but he caught my arm gently. Alex, please, don't do this. Don't throw away 12 years over a few bad weeks. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. For just a moment, I saw a glimpse of the man I'd fallen in love with in college, vulnerable, uncertain, almost desperate. Marcus, answer me honestly. If I stayed, if we tried to work this out, would you still think of me as useless when my symptoms flare up? When I need help, or can't contribute financially, or require accommodation for my condition? He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. The pause told me everything. I thought so, I said gently, removing his hand from my arm. You're not a bad person, Marcus, but you're not the right person for me anymore. Upstairs in our bedroom, I packed methodically. My clothes, my books, my art supplies, the few pieces of furniture that had been mine before our marriage. Marcus didn't try to stop me, but I could hear him pacing downstairs, occasionally talking on the phone in hushed tones. As I was loading the last box into my car, he came outside. Where are you going? Portland. Rebecca's expecting me. For how long? I don't know. However long it takes. He nodded slowly. What about the house? Our accounts? Patricia Reeves will be in touch with your attorney about the divorce proceedings. I'm not interested in fighting over assets, Marcus. I just want out. I got into my car and started the engine. Through the windshield, I could see Marcus standing in our driveway, looking lost and confused. For a brief moment, I felt sorry for him, but not sorry enough to stay. As I drove through our neighborhood for the last time, past the desert landscaping and Spanish-style homes that had been my world for 5 years, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. My phone rang as I reached the highway on-ramp. Rebecca's name appeared on the dashboard display. "I'm on my way," I said without preamble. "Good. Jake's making his famous chili, and I've set up the guest room. How are you feeling?" "About the surgery, about everything." I considered the question as I merged into traffic, Phoenix's skyline shrinking in my rearview mirror. How was I feeling? "Free," I said finally. "Scared, but free." "That's exactly how you should feel. The scared part gets easier. The free part just gets better." As I drove north through the Arizona desert, heading toward a new life in a city I'd never lived in, with a sister I hadn't seen in over a year, I realized something profound. Marcus had been wrong about everything, especially about me being useless. I wasn't useless. I was just getting started. 6 months later, I was sitting in a coffee shop in Portland's Pearl District, reviewing proofs for what would become my first major design client in my new city. The Oregon rain drummed gently against the large windows, and I found the sound oddly comforting, a stark contrast to the desert silence I'd grown accustomed to in Phoenix. My MS symptoms had stabilized significantly since the surgery. The device Dr. Martinez had implanted was working better than anyone had hoped, and I'd found an excellent neurologist in Portland who specialized in my condition. Some days were still harder than others, but I'd learned to work with my body's rhythms rather than against them. More importantly, I'd learned to value myself again. "Alexander Collins?" A woman's voice interrupted my thoughts. I looked up to see a tall, elegant woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes. "Yes, I'm Margaret Chun from the Urban Arts Council. We spoke on the phone about the museum rebranding project." I stood to shake her hand, grateful that my symptoms were having a good day. "Miss Chun, it's wonderful to meet you in person. We've been corresponding for weeks about a major project rebranding the Portland Museum of Contemporary Art. It was the kind of work I dreamed of doing when I first got into graphic design, but had never had the opportunity to pursue while supporting Marcus's career." "I have to tell you," Margaret said as we settled into our chairs, "your portfolio is exactly what we've been looking for. Fresh, innovative, but with a respect for tradition that will appeal to our board members." "Thank you. I've been looking forward to diving into this project. There's just one thing I need to ask, and please don't take this the wrong way. Your previous work shows a clear gap about 8 years where your style seems to have been quite constrained. More conservative, less creative. But your recent work is extraordinary. What changed?" I smiled, thinking about how to answer that question honestly. "I got divorced, and I stopped trying to make myself smaller to fit into someone else's life." Margaret laughed. "That's the best reason for a creative renaissance I've ever heard." Over the next hour, we discussed the project in detail. The museum wanted a complete visual overhaul that would attract younger visitors while maintaining their reputation for serious artistic curation. It was challenging, complex work that would take months to complete and pay more than I'd made in my best year as a freelancer in Phoenix. After Margaret left, I stayed in the coffee shop to work on some smaller projects. Around me, Portland's creative energy hummed, young artists discussing their latest exhibitions, entrepreneurs planning startups, writers working on novels. I'd found my tribe here, people who valued creativity and authenticity over productivity and profit margins. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "How did the meeting go?" "Got the job," I typed back, celebrating with a latte and client work. "That's my sister. Jake and I are taking you to dinner tonight." No arguments. I was gathering my things to head home when an unknown number called my phone. The area code was Phoenix. "Hello, Alex. It's Marcus." I hadn't heard his voice in 6 months. It sounded differente, older, maybe. Uncertain. "What can I do for you, Marcus?" I wanted to call and, well, I heard about your success. The museum project. "Congratulations. How did you hear about that?" "Your mom mentioned it to my mom at the grocery store." Small world. I waited, not filling the silence. I'd learned that lesson in therapy, not rushing to make other people comfortable with their own awkwardness. Look, I called because I wanted to apologize. Really apologize. Not just for what I said about you being useless, but for everything. The way I handled your diagnosis, the way I treated you during our marriage, especially toward the end. Okay, I've been going to counseling, individual therapy, trying to figure out why I acted the way I did, why I was so focused on money and control and, I don't know, keeping everything in neat little boxes. I sat back down at my table. This wasn't what I'd expected. What did you figure out? That I was scared? Terrified, actually. When you got diagnosed, it meant things were going to change, and I've never been good with change. So instead of dealing with my fear, I tried to make it your problem. I made you feel like you were the problem. I could hear genuine regret in his voice, but also something else, a kind of desperation. Marcus, why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know that it was never about you. You were never useless. You were the strongest person in our marriage, and I was too much of a coward to admit that I was the weak one. What happened with Vanessa? A long pause. That ended months ago. She wanted things I couldn't give her: attention, emotional availability. Turns out I'm not great at that with anyone. Despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy for him. Are you doing better? With the therapy? Some days. It's hard work, facing the parts of yourself you don't like. But Alex, I need you to know leaving me was the right thing to do. I wasn't good for you. I probably hadn't been good for you for years. I felt tears prick my eyes, not from sadness but from a kind of closure I hadn't realized I needed. Thank you for saying that. Are you happy? In Portland. I looked around the coffee shop, thought about my new apartment in a converted warehouse, my growing client base, the friends I'd made in my MS support group, the art classes I'd started taking. Yes, I really am. Good. That's good. You deserve to be happy. After we hung up, I sat for a while watching the rain and thinking about the journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I'd been a woman who measured her worth by her husband's approval, who'd made herself smaller and quieter to avoid conflict, who'd believed that love meant sacrificing your dreams for someone else's. Now I was a woman who'd left behind everything familiar to build a life that honored who I really was. I had a chronic illness that would require ongoing management, but I also had clarity about my priorities and boundaries that I'd never possessed before. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Dr. Rodriguez, my Portland neurologist. Lab results look great. See you in 3 months, unless you need anything before then. Keep up the excellent self-care. Self-care. That was something I'd never prioritized during my marriage. Now it was the foundation of everything else: my health, my work, my relationships. That evening, Rebecca and Jake took me to a small restaurant in the Alberta district to celebrate the museum contract. Over dinner, Jake raised his beer in a toast. To Alex, who taught us all that sometimes the best thing you can do is bet on yourself. To second chances, Rebecca added. To learning that your worth isn't determined by other people's fears, I said, raising my own glass. As we clinked glasses, I thought about the note I'd left for Marcus before my surgery. I'd written it from a place of pain and determination, but also from a deep understanding that I deserved better than I was accepting. That night, back in my apartment, I sat at my desk, a beautiful antique piece I'd found at a Portland estate sale, and opened my laptop. I had work to do on the museum project, designs to create that would bear my name and represent my vision. But first, I wrote a letter to my past self, the woman who'd sat in Dr. Martinez's office a year ago, terrified not just of her diagnosis, but of disappointing the man she'd married. Dear Alex, the diagnosis you're about to receive will change your life, but not in the way you think. It won't make you useless or weak or less worthy of love. It will make you brave. The man sitting at home, too busy to come with you to this appointment, will show you who he really is in the coming weeks. Believe him. Don't make excuses for him. Don't try to change him. Don't blame yourself for his limitations. You are about to discover that you are so much stronger than you ever imagined. You will leave behind everything familiar and build a life that celebrates who you are instead of apologizing for it. Trust yourself. Bet on yourself. Love yourself enough to demand the love you deserve. You are not useless. You are just getting started. Love the woman you're becoming. I saved the letter in a folder on my computer labeled Strength. then got to work on designs that would help a museum tell stories about art, creativity, and the courage it takes to create something beautiful from the raw materials of your life. Outside, Portland's gentle rain continued to fall, and I smiled as I worked, grateful for the storm that had brought me here.